let us march forward. And the next speaker is from Florida, where we need the humanism the most. He is the first humanist chaplain in Florida after a long fight, and he's still fighting the fight to carry on to other institutions. Having been a social worker in New York, he has seen it all, right? No. Almost. It's really nice to hear from a social worker on secular patients graciously accepting the second-class status. I worked in a Catholic hospital as a doctor, and I was a second-class status too. Joe?
Good morning. When I heard Margaret Downey's presentation, I was impressed with the fact that we have had similar experiences. And I'll also be sharing some life experiences that patients have had from a slightly different perspective. What I'm hoping will happen is that you will leave this meeting today and you will go home to your communities and start doing something to make certain that the sick children in your area, the adults who have reached older age, who are disabled, who are not physically too able to speak for themselves, that you and I will motivate their facilities to protect them, to make certain that they will not be proselytized, and to make certain that their humanist perspective, or their atheist perspective, or their agnostic perspective will be honored. It's not very complex, but you and I, and our generations, very graciously accept second-class treatment, and I'd like us to ask for first-class treatment. And if anyone here is a member of a minority, you know that the majority never, ever, ever gives up power willingly. They have to be pushed. If black Americans would have waited for well-intentioned white people to fight for the civil rights, Rosa Parks would still be in the back of the bus, okay? You and I, as humanists, atheists, agnostics, I'm just amazed at how much effort we spend arguing with one another, sometimes with very harsh language, unnecessarily harsh language, legal costs. We need to unite and focus on some common core values. And my friends, I'm hoping one of those values will be protecting people who are in a state of life they're really too weak to advocate for themselves. The people you spoke about had tremendous courage. You know, not everyone has that courage and that intellect. So let me continue. If you have to leave, that was in essence the summary of the entire presentation. So if you're really busy, you wouldn't have to stay for the rest. Okay? But essentially, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here at Columbia University. The last time I was at Columbia was in 1966 when I was in training to be a VISTA volunteer with Domestic Peace Corps. The hotel accommodations today are much more luxurious. At that time, we were asked to live and work in poor areas. And I learned, my friends, poor people don't like living in poor areas either, okay? They don't like the second-class service that they're getting, but no one's lobbying for them. And if you and I don't lobby for our people, our folks will never receive first-class service. After completing about 14 months as a VISTA volunteer in Baltimore, I earned a Master of Social Work degree and subsequently worked as a hospital social worker and as a psychiatric social worker in California and New York. One of the major principles that you'll learn as a social worker is start where the client is. That means you don't impose your values upon the client. You try to gain an understanding about their values, including their religious perspectives. Like other professionals, nurses, doctors, chaplains, social workers, we're all instructed never to impose our religious perspective on clients. As a student, you also learn about the health problems related to feeling isolated and alienated, and the benefits that come from feeling connected to those around you. I'm not aware of any medical studies that suggest ignoring a person's religious beliefs or that ignoring the religious beliefs of some people while honoring the religious beliefs of others is beneficial. It's not good medical, nursing, social work, or chaplain practice, yet that is what happens in almost every medical facility in America. I'm not talking about 50%, 80%, 95%. I think I'm talking about 98 or 99%. Wouldn't you agree? Thanks. Again, and yet very few of us complain. Very few of us complain. partly because we secularists were accustomed to being self-reliant. And let me assure you, you and I don't need a secular support person at our moment of death. We've lived our entire life being pretty independent. Okay? When I've met with people, I wasn't saying anything particularly elegant. What brought them comfort was the fact that I was there, that I was representing their life stance. Okay? I've spoken to people, again, as you have, who they're sincere, devout, non-theists, they've led good lives, but at the last, when they're at their most vulnerable, is when chaplains, and more importantly, religious volunteers are walking into their room. The chaplains are at least trained not to aggressively proselytize. They don't have to. They've got this cadre of religious volunteers in every facility who are going bed to bed. And you've mentioned some of the stories. Yesterday, you mentioned a story of a woman who was on a hospital gurney on the way to an operating room. She was a non-theist. And you said a nun grabbed her arm and said, "Let us pray that Jesus will help you make it through this operation." What? That's not comforting. Okay? Now, when I began contacting hospital, hospice chaplains and administrators about the need to provide secular support for secular patients, namely humanists, atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and religious skeptics, I quite naively expected them to be interested, sincerely motivated, to make certain that everyone's religious beliefs would be treated equally. I expected that their sense of professionalism would motivate them to ensure that secular patients receive the same level of recognition and support as do religious patients. I was naive. I found out instead that chaplains and CEOs are resistive to providing clearly identified secular humanist support for secular patients. Their mantra is usually the following: no one has ever asked us for that type of service. And their great standby is, our chaplains provide service to everyone. And they do. They'll be happy to walk into your room when you're weak and in agony and say, God loves you. Jesus, let's pray to Jesus that this pain will stop. And again, you eloquently mentioned many examples. I've very carefully reviewed the training program provided to certified chaplains, certified hospital chaplains. They receive a great deal of training about other theistic beliefs, even very minute religious beliefs. As long as you have a theistic belief, the chaplains will be very happy to learn about it. I don't think they receive 4 hours worth of training in how to relate to a humanist, atheist, or agnostic, or what are the organizations that you can call if you're working with one of us and you don't know what organizations you can call. You should be learning that in graduate school. Again, what I'm suggesting is that every chaplain be taught, be made familiar with the following organizations: the American Humanist Association, Council for Secular Humanism, Institute for Science and Human Values, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers, and if they're in Florida, I'd like them to learn about Humanists of the Treasure Coast, because we provide services to people on the east coast of Florida between Sebastian and Jupiter. Every chaplain should be aware of the magazines and the pamphlets that those organizations have. Now, this is nothing very complex. This is a simple, elementary introduction to what every chaplain should receive, that basic in-service that when a heathen walks into your, into your hospital, you don't just ignore them. You provide them with the minimal support. But that will not happen if you and I do not exert influence on those people today. And if I can add, I've learned, and maybe it's a physician, maybe you can address this later. I was told by a physician, he said, Joe, you're wasting your time talking to chaplains, and you're wasting your time talking to the CEOs. You got to write a letter to the board of directors. After he said that, I thought, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Because every time I contacted a CEO, who would they refer me to? The chaplain. And what would the chaplain say? Joe, do you understand that we provide services to everyone? And when I spoken to the vice president of a hospice, Joe, I don't think you understand. We provide services to everyone. Okay? What they don't want to do is recognize that you and I are there. Okay? They hesitate to put something into their brochure that says, in addition to providing chaplain services, we also provide secular support for the secular humanist, atheist, and agnostic patients and their families. We were able to motivate 2 places. The West Palm Beach VA now puts that into their patient manual, and another hospital, Martin Memorial Systems, puts that information into their hospital. But how many referrals have I gotten from those organizations in the last 4 years? Any thoughts? 0. Exactly, you win. Okay. Now, there's one chaplain, I'd like to mention her by name. Cindy Mirafin is a chaplain, head chaplain at the Indian River Medical Center. Now, you know, when I mention someone by name, we're only going to hear good news. And the facts are this woman deserves good news. She is a sincere, devout, caring Christian. She is dedicated to making certain that people have comfort from whatever perspective they have. I was a volunteer chaplain with that organization for about a half a year. And I'm very grateful to Mindy Serafin. She took me around the hospital, oriented me, introduced me to the doctors, to the nurses. When I forgot how to get to places, she'd walk me there. Again, she did what every chaplain in America should be doing, which is reaching out to the non-theistic community and helping us to become integrated into the medical systems. Again, my experience has been that medical facilities are biased in favor of theism, and their administrators and chaplains have instituted policies that reflect the 1950s, not 2015. In the 1950s, fewer than 5% of Americans described themselves as non-religious. By 1990s, figure rose to 8%, 14% in 2001, 16% in 2010, 19% in 2013. It's safe to say it's 20% in 2015. We can all go to the Pew Research and Google those items. Something like 33% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 refer to themselves as non-religious, and some of those folks are in the military. And not only are they not getting support from their own perspective, they're being pressured to attend church services and to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. That is awful. And that will only stop if you and I get together, stop fighting among ourselves, and coalesce around a few basic values. Keep it simple. All we want is equality. And when our sons and daughters, nephews and nieces, when they enter the military, we'd like them to be treated equally. Nothing special. We'd like them to be treated equally. And they won't be if you and I don't fight for them. Very importantly, this was a shock to me. When I reviewed the religious preferences of patients admitted to the hospitals I worked with, I was surprised to learn that only a minority of those patients indicated they were religious and had a church, synagogue, or temple that they were affiliated with. Okay. What's a minority? Somewhere around maybe 35%, 40%, in that range, 30 to 40%. That makes me wonder, why are medical facilities, why do they hire as many theistic chaplains as they do? And why does Medicare law require that a religious chaplain be on the hospice intake team when you, I, or a loved one is being evaluated for hospice? I've never had a theistic chaplain comfort me when I was having struggles. I've never had them celebrate the good times with me. I don't need them and I don't want them at my bedside when I'm in dire need of help. And I don't say that out of hatred. It's just I don't want to talk to them unless if I know they've treated me equally. I would welcome Mindy Serafin, but most chaplains aren't Mindy Serafin. Again, most patients are functioning quite nicely in their pre-hospital lives without religious representation. Why is it that the hospitals, medical facilities assume that you've got to have a theistic chaplain? It's not for the patient, it's for the religious organizations. Okay. My first attempt to gain humanist acceptance was at a public institution, at the State University of New York at Buffalo. Again, as a tribute to Paul Kurtz, I started, that sentence isn't going to flow too well. Let me try 2 sentences. The first sentence would be, I started after I retired as a social worker, I started the Humanist Perspective TV program and invited Paul Kurtz to be a guest. He was a guest, and then invited me to join his organization where the program was filmed for a few years. I was very appreciative to Paul. One day when I was at the Center for Inquiry, it occurred to me that the University of Buffalo is right across the street, and they have a ministerial association, and I was also a member of the American Humanist Association. So I asked Paul's permission, and it was okay with him that I use my American Humanist contacts as a clergy to knock on the door and say, hi, I would like to join your ministerial association because I have all the rights of clergy as a humanist celebrant. And the Campus Crusade for Christ minister, he was the association's chairperson. He was one of the very few chaplains, ministers, that had been 100% honest with me. He said, you know, we decided a few years ago that we were only going to admit theistic religions into the group. And I said, would you be kind enough to put that in writing for me? And he said, yes, I will. I've still not received anything, okay? Now, again, I'm not a legal genius, but I thought there's got to be something wrong with a public institution saying they're simply going to eliminate secularist, I'm not sure how we would use the secularist term when we're talking about the humanist celebrants, but as you know, sometimes the law calls atheists and agnostics and humanists a religion, sometimes they don't. And in any event, eventually I was admitted to the Ministerial Association. And why? I felt the students, the secular students, they had as much right to have representation at that university as the religious students. And eventually I was interviewed. I was interviewed by the chairperson of the association, the Campus Crusade for Christ minister, and the entire membership. And I remember the Campus Crusade for Christ minister said, we will lose everything we share in common if we allow this person to enter our organization. And I said, well, excuse me, I think we all believe in compassion. We believe in being rational. We share those values, and you're not going to lose those values. We're just coming to those values from a different perspective. You think they come from God. We think they've evolved over time. The key is the hospices are very reluctant to allow us in as members. If you become a humanist celebrant, or you can become a Pastafarian cleric with the Flying Spaghetti Monster religion, you have the right to apply for a status as a clerical person. If you go to a hospital, there's a very good chance that you're not going to be hassled very much about becoming a member because they have to abide by the law. You can push that. Whenever I approach a hospital, they generally allow me to become affiliated with them, to have, quote, outside clerical privileges. On a personal basis, my daughter was in a hospital in California, University of California at San Francisco, very liberal area. She was pregnant, had a very complicated pregnancy, lost her first child, and was told all the things you hear, you know, your baby's in a better place now, your baby's with God now, God wanted your baby. That brought my daughter no comfort. When she went to that hospital with her second pregnancy, she was on a gurney, and in comes the ultrasound technician at a San Francisco hospital in a liberal area. He had a cross around his neck, my friends, could have been a weapon, and a huge picture of the Virgin Mary. And my daughter is laying there. Is she in any position to be arguing or asserting her rights? No. Who in the hospital is in charge of making certain that people treat people with respect? You can't be just pushing your religion down their throat. So my daughter, her eyes and my eyes just met, and we were both silent until this gentleman finished. I once was hospitalized after I had some heart issues regarding some medication I was taking, and once I was given oxygen, I calmed down. I began to fill out the paperwork, and I said I don't want to be visited by a religious chaplain. I'd like to be visited by a secular support person. And the next morning at 5:30, Catholic priest came to my room. I very courteously explained to him what my desires were, and what he should have said is, well, Mr. Beck, I'll try and find someone to help you. But that's not what he said. And that's not what the other chaplains are going to say. What he did say was, you'll have to take that up with administration. I was laying in my bed with oxygen in my nose. What happened to just a little bit of compassion? Okay? And then he turned when he left my room, and he said, God loves you. My friends, you and I can protect, and we need to protect our loved ones from that type of intrusion while you and I are strong enough to do it. You and I are strong enough today to contact the trustees at the hospitals and demand that they have secular representation. Demand that they place the following in their hospital brochures. For our secular patients, atheists, agnostics, and humanists, we have secular supporters available. That is now on the paperwork of the Martin Health Systems and the West Palm Beach VA. Okay. Alcoholism Rehab Center. We went there, recovering alcoholic and myself, to inform the director about the existence of alternatives to AA. And his position was, I'm not making this up. He says, Joe, General Motors does not tell people about Ford, and we're not telling anyone about secular support services. I couldn't believe it. I mean, how callous. This is from a gentleman who's got a professional degree. It's embarrassing. And then when I try to explain to him the difference between selling cars and the fact that we want to provide services to people, and that while AA can be very helpful to many people, all we're suggesting is that he mentioned there's alternatives. He gave me the Ford Chevy item again. Okay, 99-year-old lady, visitor, she said, am I going to die? We said, well, why? What's wrong? She said, this man came into my room and said, don't be afraid, you'll be with God soon. Now, this lady, she was never afraid until this gentleman came in, and yeah, that was verified, okay? Same patient. She now was under hospice care. Religious volunteer came into her room and said, when she found out she was an atheist, I'm going to ask Jesus to pray for you. I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to ask Jesus to help you to accept God so that you won't have to burn in hell. Now, this woman was a staunch atheist. She wasn't scared. She just didn't like the fact this lady came into her room, and we tried to help her. Okay? Okay. Here's a shortened version of a letter from a patient entered a hospital. He said, a man and woman wearing blue smocks entered my room, stated they were representatives of the chaplain department, and they wanted to share their Christian message with me. I told them that I was not interested, and at that point, they said, you know, I feel sorry for you. Okay? He said, I became very angry and asked him to leave. Nurse came into my room shortly thereafter, and she said, Mr. Rogers, your blood pressure is so high. What happened? And he said, well, I had this interchange with his nurse, or I had this interchange with these religious visitors. We filed a complaint with him to the hospital. And who did they send? Oh, and by the way, his complaint stated, I don't want to be visited by any chaplains unless I invite them. Obviously, they sent a chaplain to make things right, okay? I mean, they are so insensitive, and they're getting away with it, and it's not their fault, my friends. It's our fault. We accept second-class treatment. I don't care if you are a multimillionaire, okay, or you're on poverty row. When you get into a hospital or hospice, you are not going to have your rights as a secularist respected. And we have numerous instances of donors to hospitals or hospices who do have some assets. They're bird dogged by the chaplain. Chaplain comes in, they say, no, thank you, we're secularists. The next day, how are things going? He's bird dogging some donations, okay? What do chaplains discuss? What do chaplains discuss? What do secular chaplains discuss? We discuss the same things that the average chaplain discusses, namely, we talk about how are you feeling? How are things going? You try to develop a relationship with the patient, and then based on what they tell you, you try to help them achieve their goals. My friends, the religious chaplains spend less than 5% of their time talking about religion. At the very end, they'll end with a prayer, but most of what they talk about doesn't relate to religion. I've got, we're going to short circle a few things. We're going to play a song about two people. One guy was poor as a church mouse, Phil. He was a Vietnam-era veteran, vocal atheist, very staunch fella. He bordered on being obnoxious, you know. I'd say, Phil, could you kind of tone it down a little bit on the anti-religion stuff? Okay. He developed cancer. He was diabetic, living at home, poor diet. When I took him to the hospice, he had open wounds. He was bleeding. And they expected him to die very, very shortly. But because of the excellent medical care and nursing care that Phil received at the West Palm Beach VA, he got better. And as he got better, he said, you know, Joe, I've got people walking in my room. My roommates die, and there's a minister walking in with a chapel, and they're praying. They're praying over this fellow. What's going to happen when I die? He said, I'd like you to put together a letter, and I want to send it to the administrators, which we did. Put the letter together, and then Phil said, Joe, I talked over with my social worker, and I think I'm going to hold off on this because I'm completely dependent on these people. And I know some of them are very religious, and I don't want to risk getting any poor quality care. Okay? The other person, Navy veteran, World War II. How much time, Tony? Okay, good. Okay. The other gentleman stabilized a ship during World War II that was torpedoed, and came back to the States and decided to teach Boy Scouts astronomy, which he did, until someone found out that he had to fill out an application to be a Boy Scout advisor or whatever, and when they found out that he was non-religious, he was asked to leave. I spoke to him in his 90s. He was in an assisted living facility, and at that point, his wife had called me because she said, you know, my husband said he's never been anywhere where there's always church services and there's religious music, and he'd like to talk to somebody from a non-theistic perspective. And Tony was nice enough. I think you mentioned me to the family. And in any event, the second individual, Navy veteran, was teaching Boy Scouts astronomy, couldn't do it anymore because he was not religious. During World War II, we provided a Lutheran chaplain for the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg. We provided a Catholic priest for the Catholics. When we hire an Islamic terrorist today, we provide them with an Islamic chaplain. The Armed Services Committee just voted unanimously to not allow humanist or atheist chaplains in the military. You and I owe our soldiers something. I give you that background because sometimes music speaks louder than words, whatever. In any event, I'd like you to listen to the next song, and I'd like you to picture Phil, the Vietnam veteran, staunch atheist. He was he was weak. And he would say, you know, Joe, I'll tell you, even a visit by a chaplain is better than being ignored. So he said, I listen to these people, they're not pushing religion, but he said, I'm glad you're here because, I don't think anybody else on this floor is atheist or a humanist. I guess at that point we'll play The Atheist in a Foxhole song. I'd like you to listen to it, and I'd like you to go home and do what you can to make certain that your medical facilities provide services.
I served in the Army at Utah, came under attack. And it never mattered what I believed. My platoon knew I had their back. For 40 years I taught bio and chem. Coaching baseball was my job. But I couldn't teach Boy Scouts astronomy 'cause I didn't believe in God. If I don't believe in God, I can't teach the constellations. If I don't believe in God, I can't play among the stars. If I don't believe in God, I'm a danger to the boys. Can't give any merit badges if I don't believe in God. My name is Bill Davy, I was in the Navy, caught up in that Vietnam fight. Yeah, I know we shouldn't have been over there, but I did what I thought was right. And I saved the life of a sailor as the waves come over the rail. And it never mattered what I believed when I delivered your mail. But if I don't believe in God, no one comes my way. When I'm dying of cancer at the local VA, there were priests and ministers, imams and rabbis all coming to pray. But the chaplain must think I'll be burning in hell. From what he had to say, there were Lutheran and Catholic clerics to comfort the Nazis at Nuremberg. But atheist memories never were honored by any words I ever heard. We died in your wars, suffer PTSD and addictions all the same. Give us a treatment program that isn't in God's name. No help for the heathen, no prayers at my bed, no stairway to heaven. What the chaplain said, no God in my foxhole, no Lord at my side, no bedside manner when the secular humanist died. No God in my foxhole, no Lord at my side, no bedside manner when the secular humanist died.
Thank you. My friends, I hope when we go home, thank you for the applause, but really, I hope when we go home, we will each do something, join with others, and motivate the medical facilities in your neighborhood to provide some support. Because these people in the hospital hospices now, they're in no condition to fight the fight. You and I are. Thank you.